one of the best things I learned, Eddie, was that most church members are more intelligent, more experienced, and know how to share the gospel better than we as pastors do.
Welcome to Dealing Hope, another episode where we bring to you conversations of hope with fellow leaders, for leaders who are serving in this season of turmoil, uncertainty, but there is the assurance that God's hope is with us. My name is Eddie Tupai. I'm the lead pastor for the Adventist Church in the New Zealand and Pacific region, and that Pacific part includes Pitcairn, French Polynesia, Wallis and Futuna, New Caledonia, Cook Islands, and the New Zealand part. Well, that's pretty clear. So I want to just introduce this by saying I have a very good friend. His name is Terry Johnson. And in this conversation with Terry, I get to peek into his life before New Zealand, because I met him here in New Zealand, where he was the pastor of Henderson Church, but didn't know too much about his very interesting life before New Zealand, and then how God has led him since then, where he was called to Western Australia, where he served in a number of roles, including as president for the Western Australia Conference region for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then for the city of Sydney, where he was before his current role, where he is now serving as the president, lead pastor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia. And the conversation is as always very interesting, but I am always interested as to where the conversation may go, what sidetrack we may take, and then this was no different. And one of the sidetracks that we took that I really appreciated Pastor Terry for was allowing us to discuss First Nations people of Australia and the ministry that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has had for Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders for many years, and what we can learn from that in New Zealand, and I'm sure in other parts of the world. And so, look, let me just let us get into the interview right now, and know that you'll be blessed. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation with Pastor Terry Johnson. Hey, Terry, welcome to Dealing Hope. So really good to see you. And you've just told me before we started that you're there looking out the window at the city of Perth. That's got to be a good thing.
It is a good thing. I spent 11 years of my life here in this wonderful state and city, and the memories and some of the hobbies that I have are directly related to this state, and it's deeply and firmly in my heart.
Well, I've been looking forward to catching up with you. Since you left New Zealand for WA, we have been passing each other, and we've had, a few brief conversations here and there, but never have had that chance to just sit down and talk. And this time, I get to share that conversation with others in this part of the world who I know will be blessed by your experiences and what God has done through you. So thank you so much for joining me today, and really appreciate your time. And I know you've got to get to your next meeting soon, which is at Mamarapha, which I just absolutely have a lot of respect for. And please do pass on our regards to the team there. And maybe just a little sidetrack. So tell people who don't know what Mamarapha is, what is that, and what is it all about, and what are some of your hopes for such an important institution that the church has in Australia?
I forgot to say thank you, Eddie, for inviting me, and for the welcome. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Look, Mamarapha College is a mid-level tertiary institution that has just received its accreditation from the General Conference for achieving that status. And it is a college that is aimed at First Nations people from all across Australia. And about 65% of the students who come to Mamarapha are not Seventh-day Adventist. And we offer courses in health, in health management and care, and in ministry. So the students come from all over. predominantly from the more isolated areas of the north and the west of Australia. And we train them to be Bible workers, we train them to be teachers, we train them to be pastors, and we train them, most importantly, to actually be health workers who go back to their community and help their communities get away from diabetes and diabetes trends, and trying to close the gap. One of the things that we're trying to do as a union is to put in place a reconciliation action plan, which is all about closing the gap between the Western society, its age before they die, and wealth. Whereas in our First Nations people, they can die 20 to 25 years before we would normally expect them to, and the wage gap is very, very big. And we believe in the ministry of reconciliation, Eddie. And with that, God has told us we have to be ambassadors of reconciliation. We recognize that we've done quite well in sharing the gospel and evangelism, because about 3.3% of the population in Australia is Indigenous, and we've got somewhere between 4 and 5% of our church in Australia who are First Nations people. So we've done well there, but what we haven't done so well is in actually bringing them up, lifting them up from where they are, and giving them opportunities for a long life, a good life, a life that's filled with hope because of what Christ has done for all of us.
Amen. The ministry that the church in Australia, the Adventist Church in Australia, has for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, and I love that term, First Nation, to the First Nation people, really is pioneering. We don't have such a ministry in New Zealand. We have tried to over the past years, and we're in the throes of trying to review and resurrect a ministry. There in Australia, you say ATSM, but maybe it would be good if you could just share a little bit about what ATSM is and how that's going. I know that I used to receive a calendar. I remember receiving a calendar. I remember that there was a yearly or biannual camp and I think this is absolutely pioneering type of work, but I'm sure you all there hope that it could be a lot more than it is right now. But please share about ATSM.
So ATSM has been in place for about 50 years in Australia. Okay. We've always had some form of ministry that has been reaching out to First Nations people, going all the way back to about 1915, 1916, with some of the missions in Queensland and in Western Australia. Those have had some excellent outcomes and also some poor ones that we've had to apologize for and work through the ramifications of. And then around the late 50s is when ATSM, or Aboriginal Torres Strait Island Ministries, was put in place. And now we have our first First Nations director in Pastor Darren Garlett. And we've been told by the General Conference that the ATSM program, along with Mamarapha, is the best evangelistic, holistic, center of influence kind of ministry to First Nations people around the world. And they're coming to us to look at what we've actually put in place and how they can replicate that back in Canada and in the United States and other parts of the world to share the good news that we have. And we have to give thanks to a lot of the pioneers. One of the things that we do in Australia is we have an acknowledgement of country. When we come onto land that has been traditionally owned by Indigenous people, if we are not from that country, we have an acknowledgement of country. If we are from that country, then it's a welcome to country. And it's just a reflection, a reminder that over the generations, the land was cared for and tended to by the elders in the past. And the way that we do it as Seventh-day Adventists is to give glory to the Lord for what he's done through those individuals. And we acknowledge his ownership of the land. And in so doing, we affirm and glorify him while paying respect to the people who have cared for that land for generations.
We have much to learn from you, and I hope that we can continue this conversation so that we can see something established here in New Zealand to that level. Now, we've really jumped into a wonderful topic there, and I'm glad we have. But I just want to go back to pre-New Zealand, pre-Terry Johnson in New Zealand, because my first memory really was of you serving here in New Zealand and pastor of Henderson Church. I remember you being part of the building program there. They have a lovely facility there that's very functional, can be used for the community, and right there next to the school. So before Auckland, New Zealand, at Henderson Church, where were you? Maybe if we could go back to when did you start training for ministry? Where was that? And did you serve in any other places when you completed your studies?
Look, I went to Laurelbrook Academy in Dayton, Tennessee, which was a self-supporting school, an independent self-supporting school where we worked half the day and went to school half the day. And when I graduated, I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I thought that the Lord was calling to ministry at the age of 18. But when I was having a conversation with my parents, they said, look, you've done your ATAR very well. It was called the ACT there. And why don't you see if the Lord is calling you by actually going in and taking a medical course, becoming a doctor to begin with. And so my first semester, I went to Southwestern Adventist University in Texas and took biology and met up with a whole bunch of different people. By the end of the first semester, I realized that this was not where I wanted to be. I really wanted to be in the theology department. And the calling of the Lord was very clear in the second semester in February of 1999. 1989. That's how far back it is, Eddie. 1989.
You're trying to make yourself younger than you are, Terry.
My 52 years is catching up to me, Edward. So when I was there, the call of the Lord was so clear that I decided to go ahead and do theology and graduated in 1992 and was hired by the Texas Conference. And I worked at the Fort Worth First Church for my first 2 years, got married to Kimberly then. And then we moved up to Andrews University, did the master's degree, the MDiv is what it's called, worked with Dwight Nelson at Pioneer Memorial Church. That was my internship for 2.5 years there. Came back to Texas, and they sent me to this little church of 9 people in East Texas, which is normally where, if you were a Texan pastor, if they sent you to East Texas, you knew you were on your way out of the conference and they were trying to help you move on. And that's where I started after my internship. And that church grew in the 1 year that I was there. It grew from 9 people to 44 people. And we didn't have a single baptism, but we had 15 people doing Bible studies. And the conference president who put me there, Elder Steve Gifford, is a good friend of mine. He just died a couple of years ago. He said to me, well, you've done all right in this small place. How about we give you another place? And there's a whole story as to how I became the pastor of the Clean Church. And that really set me up to learn how to deal with conflict, culture, different community expectations. It was a military post in Texas at Fort Hood. Met people who are friends of mine to this day and who blessed me with their experience. And we got a call to come to New Zealand because my parents were working in New Caledonia. Dad was the mission president in New Cal. And in 2000, when there was the restructuring of the unions, he went to NZPUC and became the French ministry secretary and the ministerial secretary. And Mom came and became women's ministry secretary part-time. So we came to visit them. And when we visited New Zealand back in 1999, we fell in love. And we actually moved over to New Zealand in June 2002. So we've actually been in the South Pacific for 20 years out of the 30 years that I've been working as a minister for the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Amazing how time flies. 20 years. That really is. Now, I didn't even realize that until you've said it now. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I was 32 years old when I got there. And Eddie, I think the first time I met you was obviously in 2002. And then the first time we really had a lot to do with each other was Cast Your Net Camporee in 2003, which was the Union Camporee. And I have a scar on the back of one of my legs that is a memento of that camporee from a rope burn that I had doing one of the obstacle courses with all the Pathfinders.
Was setting you up for youth ministry when you went to WA, because you were youth director there, weren't you?
Yes, yes, for 7.5 years here before I became conference president, here for 4 years, and then conference president in Sydney for 4 years, and now in Melbourne for the last 8 months.
I really do resonate going back to what you said about the church you went to after you finished at the seminary, completing your MDiv, about learning some of those core foundational pieces about ministry that hopefully you learn earlier than later, like conflict, getting through that, working with diverse groups of people and having had that experience is so rich and so important to get those grounded into you early, because you will always meet that in ministry at whatever level of the church you're at, but just foundational because of our work with people. So yeah, I love that point, and that you highlighted that. And I think that's just something to note and remember about development in ministry. Yes, we do learn a whole lot at seminary, but it's when we're actually in the field when it really finds traction, and you think, oh, okay, so this is what the textbook it was trying to teach me.
And one of the best things I learned, Eddie, was that most church members are more intelligent, more experienced, and know how to share the gospel better than we as pastors do. And the best experience I had was at the Colleen Church, that larger church that I took over. We went from 170 people attending church every Sabbath to 320 in the space of 3 years. And it had nothing to do with me. It had something to do with a woman named Jane Ziesmer, who's my very good friend to this day. Jane grew up in the Lutheran church, studied to be a Lutheran priest, and then married a Seventh-day Adventist dentist. And actually from that point on came and became a Seventh-day Adventist. And she came to me on my first Sabbath in the church there and said, Pastor Johnson, are you actually going to work? I said, well, what are you talking about, Jane? And she said, are you actually going to do what God has called you to do? I said, well, tell me, what do you think God has called me to do? And she said to me, God has called you to visit people and to bring them to Jesus. I said, okay. And she said, if you allow me, I will actually take care of your schedule, and we will find ways to bring people to Jesus together. And she was true to her word, Eddie. I put her in charge of the greeting, and that's the most underrated ministry of any church.
Great.
Greeting people in the car park, wherever they are.
Mm-hmm.
She would get them. She would get their name, their phone number, their email address. And this is back in 1996, 97. And she would then have me write a letter on Monday, a form letter, because she would introduce me to them on Sabbath. She would take them to a Sabbath school class, my Sabbath school class, because she insisted that I start a Christianity 101 class. And so I did, and I had 2 elders that I taught how to actually run the class when I wasn't there. And we averaged 27 baptisms per year without doing a single evangelistic program other than Net 98. That was the only one that we actually got involved in over that 4-year period of time. And because of her ministry, I mean, not only would they get a letter on Tuesday, right, Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday, but the letter said, Jane's going to be calling you. And when she calls you, she's going to set up an appointment for me to come and see you. And so I would be in their home within 10 days of them attending church, meet their family, invite them to come to my Sabbath school class. Over the course of 12 months, we would actually teach all the fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, including the prophetic understanding that we had. And so when they got baptized, they were already attending members of the church. And it was just a simple decision for them to go, well, you know, I'm here. I feel the Lord is calling me. Let's get into that water, Pastor. And it was unbelievable. And to this day, Eddie, I use Jane's principles wherever I go.
Lady, she sounds like a born evangelist. Just loves people and knows how to reach people for Christ, and also knows how to lead the pastor into ministry. And bless your heart for being humble enough to say, okay, this is someone that the Lord has sent to me, and I will work with her and with our church, and the Lord blesses.
Absolutely. And God has people like that in every single church. And if ministers just wait and listen and then harness that by saying, okay, let me be humble and realize that this person's got much to teach me, the Lord would be able to bring people into faith who he can't because of our own arrogance.
And you know, Terry, often we go to a church, we get there and we think, if only we had this person, or if only we had these kinds of people. And yet it's the people in front of you. They are the ones that the Lord has sent, and they are the ones that are able to do what's needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me change tack here, and move to you now as a Kiwi, as an Aussie. You've come into these countries, you've made these countries home, and we've accepted you and Kimberly and your family, and we just love working with you. We just see you as one of us. But I would love to hear your perspective as you observe society in this part of the world, and some of the trends as society shifts over the decades, and yeah, the placement of the church. What is positive about how this has impacted the church? What is positive about opportunities for the church to respond to some of these changes? Because we always want to go back, but we know that's impossible. And now we know that everything before 2020 is ancient history and doesn't apply anymore. So here we are in 2022, second, third, fourth lockdown, third vaccine or whatever it is. We've lost count, but here we are, and the world's just, there's no textbook anymore. So
Yeah, look,
I love hearing you think, and so I'd love to hear some of your observations as you sit back now and think, okay, the Lord's asked me to lead the church in Australia. Let me start. Don't jump into what you're going to do as a church. I'll come to that next, but just think about, just the society and what you see there.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and thank you for allowing me to do the observations over the last 20 years. First of all, I forgot to say kia ora whanau, because we lived in New Zealand for 5 years. Our son Alec was born there. Our daughter Kirsten was born in Texas, and we just have a real affinity with New Zealand. We just loved it. We loved our 5 years there. It was very, very sad to leave the Henderson Church and come to WA. And of course, it was sad to leave WA. It was sad to leave Sydney. And one day it'll be sad to leave Melbourne as well, because we make friends everywhere we go in ministry.
Now, before you go on, just that you have to extend your greetings, because remember, we've got New Caledonia, French Polynesia, you've got French background. And so maybe that's a part I've been remiss to actually pick up. You are many people. So maybe just break that down for us as to where your mom comes from, which is absolutely unique in itself. And your dad, of course, who you've mentioned. Who is Terry?
Yeah, a very good question. My father was born in Mauritius and grew up in Mauritius, and my mom was born in Iceland. They met at Newbold College back in 1967, fell in love within 3 months, got engaged within 3 months, and then got married a year later. And I was born 15 months after their wedding day. And they've been together now for 54 years, which is quite amazing. Dad's turning 80 here in a little while, this coming Sabbath actually, and he has, he's my example, as is my mom. Really blessed there. I married an American. I was born in France, and so I do speak French. We lived in Africa. We've lived in 9 different countries and enjoyed every single one of them. I have access to 4 passports, although I only carry 2 because it's just too expensive to carry any more than that, Eddie. And just blessed to be a citizen of the world, but really a citizen of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. And that really is, again, God's gift to you, but also God has used that as a gift to wherever you serve and the people that you've served. So let's come back now to your observations of society in this part of the world and the rapid changes in that 20 years.
So the most example that I can share is when I'm looking at what has happened. When I first came to New Zealand and then to Australia, we were quite unique as countries. We had an affinity with the UK, we had an affinity with the United States, but we were unique. What has happened over the 20 years that I can see is that with the promulgation of social media, we have become more and more like the North American continent in the way in which we have conversations, in our politics, in the way in which the church actually functions. When I came to New Zealand, what was really stark was how laid back the Seventh-day Adventist Church was. We were very evangelistic, but we were laid back in the way that we dealt with things. we are Protestants, and as Protestants, we protest against everything. But in New Zealand, we protested with our own unique New Zealand manner, right? I mean, you still came to church wearing shorts and thongs, and you were quite comfortable. And what has happened that I can see is that the church has become much more consumer-driven and focused. And the last 2 years of the pandemic has actually exacerbated that. The church has become more angry, which is again reflective of what's happening in society. When people get on social media, they feel like it's their, that they can be free to share whatever they feel like without any concern about who's getting hurt in the process, because it's me, I'm free, I'm democratically free. And that is something that I've seen as part of the North American scene that is affecting Australia and affecting New Zealand, affecting the church, and actually affecting the way in which we can engage with people who are looking for ministers, ambassadors of reconciliation, people who can give hope, people who can actually step out and above the fray and work through the issues in a manner that is like Jesus, willing to confront, but always doing it with grace and peace in mind. And what I'm noticing, Eddie, is this trend where the grace and peace seems to be associated with being somebody who gets walked on instead of being seen as a strength of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so instead of the joyful engagement, there is now visceral, verbal vilification of people that seems to be part and parcel of society. And it has actually come into the church as well, which I think is a travesty and something that we need to stand up, point out, and say, this is unacceptable.
You really have highlighted one of the shifts that we've seen in terms of how we interact with each other, particularly when we disagree. And it's like we've taken another whole revision of Matthew 18, and then when it comes to making things right, it always has to be on another set of terms apart from Scripture, it seems, or a willingness to reinterpret what that means. But there is that surface level of the attack, because it could be just a tweet or a post, an anonymous comment somewhere, and then retreating quickly, not really wanting to. Is this a person that I, could get to love and appreciate? Why are we having this conversation? So I value what you've shared and what you see there. And let me move now, not necessarily in this particular area that you've highlighted, but can we just come to you as the leader of the work in Australia, of the church, the Adventist Church in Australia? You've been in the seat now, you said, for 8 months.
Yeah.
You've come into a great team. You've been working at looking at the direction for the church in Australia. Last week, I think you had some meetings around that. So what are you thinking, and how do you plan to move ahead to tackle, yes, certainly some of what we've talked about, but more than that, people having the opportunity to discover God's kingdom and be a part of that?
Yeah, we did have some meetings last week. For the first time in 2 years, we had our administrative teams from all 9 conferences in Australia be able to come to Melbourne and spend some time together. And we looked at a number of different areas that we wanted to improve in. And the first and foremost one is actually at the heart of the Constitution that each one of us operates under. And one of the things I was going to share, Eddie, is that another thing that I've noticed that is a downward trend, unfortunately, is that within our own denomination, fewer and fewer people understand the structure and the reasons why we actually function the way that we do, which is completely missional focused. The second article of every single one of our constitutions around Australia and around the world is that we are put together to share the gospel in the context of the 3 angels' messages in a manner to make disciples of all of humanity.
That's our purpose. It's a clear purpose statement in every constitution. That's right.
And we function under that constitution, don't we, Eddie? I mean, it's our role as union presidents to work within the constitution and to ensure that we're doing this on behalf of the Seventh-day Adventist Church within the structure of orderliness that we have put in place. And we started it actually here in 1905. The South Pacific Division is the actually first union that was ever put in place, and that has become the way that it was. Yeah, so it's amazing to see that, but also a bit concerning that over the last 30 years, that knowledge has become one that has kind of gone away. And so a lot of people, when they join the church, they no longer know what a president does, what his role is, how important the conference executive committee is, what their role is, all of that. And so when we got together as an administrative team, we were looking at saying, okay, well, how do we make sure that after the 2 years of pandemic, that we reflect on the purpose of church and share the fact that we are disciple makers first and foremost. So we're instituting a 3-year plan between now and 2025, where over the next 18 months, we're going to be focusing on supporting the church, reconnecting at church, and encouraging church fellowship along with discipleship making. And then in 2024, we're going to look at harvesting what we have sown. And in 2025, we'll be nurturing what we have sown. Those are the 3 main themes that we're going to be having over the next 3.5 years. And that focus on personal evangelism, right? So going back to what I shared about Jane, Jane was this individual who believed that every time that somebody comes to church, God is bringing them to church so that we can actually bring them into discipleship. And as a result of her ministry, we ended up having 10 new people coming to church every single Sabbath. Because God knew the church was a safe place for them to be. If we can make our churches safe places, God will actually send 10 new people a week. Will we be ready as a people to actually bring them to our homes, eat with them, fellowship with them, share the good news with them, provide them opportunities to use the spiritual gifts that God has given them, provide them with opportunities for their spiritual fruit that God has given them through the power of the Holy Spirit to grow. And in that growing, God convicts them of what they ought to do instead of us telling them what they should do. And when we have that kind of a mentality, church grows naturally. And from our point of view in the union, we are here not to tell the churches what to do. We are here to actually add value to the conferences who are working directly with the churches and the church membership across Australia. And when we see the fact that we've got 63,000 members in Australia, while we are thankful that God has given us that many people who are saved, who are committed, we know that that is not keeping up with the population growth. So we have a desire to reach 70,000 by the time we get to 2025. And that's a minor goal. You know, we want to actually make it to 100,000. We want to see people actually sharing their faith door to door, but door to door with the people that they know, because it's the people that you know, that you've built a relationship with, who in the moments of stress come to you and say, what is it that you believe that makes you so happy when all around us we have all this negativity? I love the stories of what's going on with our church membership up in the Three Rivers area of northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, where over the last few weeks with our devastating floods, our churches have either had to shut down because they've been damaged, or they've shut down in order to have the entire membership go and help the community clean up and prepare. And what we have found from ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency, is that Denison Grellman has told us, the CEO of ADRA, that what is most needed at this time isn't the financial support or even the helping hands of coming into people's homes and cleaning out the mud. What is needed now is to help people with the emotional, psychological toll of what has occurred and the mental health conversations. And that's something that we as Seventh-day Adventists have in spades. You know, we have a hope that Jesus is coming back and all of the horrifying things that we're experiencing are going to be done away with. We have a belief and a purpose that God has actually given us. And, you know, those two things, along with a holistic, healthy lifestyle, exercise, fresh air, clean water, trust in God, and, you know, you go through that whole process. All of that actually helps people deal with the mental health ravaging that has occurred because of the wars and rumors of wars and the tsunami in Tonga and so on. Horrifying things, Eddie. But in Christ, we have an opportunity to share that this world is coming to an end. And when it does come to an end, there is a better world that's coming.
I love the hope you've been dealing there for us today. And I really do wish God's peace and blessing and much strength to you with this vision and plan that you're working on with your team, because I really can see that being something that people would see, hear, and understand and think, we can do that. That makes a whole lot of sense. That's got to be possible. And it's not out of anybody's reach, because it's, as you said, people they know. And just starting there is always going to be a much more comfortable place. Terry, thank you. Thank you for joining me on Dealing Hope and offering hope to our leaders in this part of the world, and I know to other parts of the world as well who join in regularly of Dealing Hope. I have much respect for you and wish you all the best. And today, as you visit Mamarapha, I'm sure it's going to be a blessing there today as well. So thank you very much for joining me.
And thanks for the invitation. Ka kite to everybody.
Hey, I love that. You haven't lost it.
Only the accent and pronunciation.
Good on you. Well, wasn't that a blessed conversation? So thankful to Pastor Terry, and please send him a note and let him know how much you appreciated that, and do pray for Pastor Terry, his family, and for the ministry he has of leading the work of the Adventist Church in Australia. And also, can I ask you, be sure to connect and share Dealing Hope with others in your networks who you know will be blessed by these leadership conversations. And if you are listening via podcast, please go ahead and share, give us a comment, give us some feedback so that we can continue to improve this ministry that we are embarking on with Dealing Hope. You'll also notice that we have a Sabbath morning prayer ministry where every Sabbath morning we stop at 6:45, 6:45 a.m. New Zealand time to pray. Pray for our churches as they prepare to worship together, but not only that, for the communities that our churches are a part of and our ministry to those communities. So be sure to check in with Sabbath morning prayer as well. And if you haven't seen other episodes of Dealing Hope, be sure to catch up with those on YouTube, on Facebook, on Vimeo, and with the podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and any other platform where you get your podcasts. So thank you once again for joining me with Dealing Hope. Ka kite anō.